The morning sun cast long shadows across the sprawling military base as Admiral Sarah Chen stepped out of the unmarked sedan. At first glance, she appeared to be just another civilian consultant visiting the facility. Her modest business attire and quiet demeanor gave no indication of the extraordinary woman beneath the surface. The base personnel went about their routine duties, completely unaware that one of the most decorated female Navy SEAL officers in American history had just arrived at their doorstep. Sarah had deliberately chosen to dress down for this visit. Years of experience had taught her that sometimes the most effective approach was to observe before revealing her true identity. She carried a simple briefcase and wore comfortable flats, looking more like a government auditor than a battle-hardened warrior who had served multiple tours in some of the world's most dangerous theaters of operation. The base commander, Colonel Marcus Thompson, had been expecting her arrival, but even he was surprised by her unassuming appearance. He had read her classified file the night before, studying the redacted mission reports and commendations that painted the picture of a soldier who had shattered every glass ceiling in the special operations community. Yet standing before him was a woman who could easily blend into any corporate boardroom or suburban coffee shop. Sarah's journey to this moment had begun 25 years earlier in a small farming town in Iowa. She had grown up helping her father repair tractors and learning to shoot before she could properly ride a bicycle. Her mother, a former Marine herself, had instilled in her daughter the values of service and sacrifice that would later define her military career. When Sarah announced her intention to join the Navy after high school, her family was supportive but had no idea she harbored dreams of joining the most elite fighting force in the world. The path to becoming a Navy SEAL had been anything but straightforward for Sarah. When she first expressed interest in special operations, the programs were still closed to women. She spent her early career as an intelligence officer, quietly building her reputation while waiting for the barriers to fall. During this time, she completed advanced training in combat tactics, foreign languages, and psychological operations. She earned advanced degrees in international relations and strategic studies, preparing herself for the day when opportunity would finally knock. When the military began opening combat roles to women, Sarah was among the first to volunteer for the grueling selection process. The physical and mental challenges were designed to break even the strongest candidates, and many questioned whether any woman could successfully complete the training. Sarah's instructors pushed her harder than her male counterparts, expecting her to fail and prove their preconceptions correct. Instead, she exceeded every standard and graduated at the top of her class. Her first operational assignment took her to Afghanistan, where she served as part of a joint task force hunting high-value targets in the mountainous border regions. The work was dangerous and often involved weeks of surveillance in hostile territory. Sarah's ability to blend in and gather intelligence proved invaluable, and she quickly earned the respect of her teammates. Her small stature, which some had seen as a liability, actually became an asset in certain situations where a larger operator would have been conspicuous. Over the next 15 years, Sarah participated in dozens of classified missions across 3 different continents. She rescued hostages from terrorist compounds, gathered intelligence behind enemy lines, and trained local forces in counter-terrorism tactics. Each mission added to her legend within the special operations community, though her achievements remained largely hidden from the public eye. The media occasionally reported on the increasing role of women in combat, but Sarah's specific contributions were protected by layers of classification. Her rise through the ranks was steady but not without challenges. Some senior officers remained skeptical of women in special operations, questioning whether they could maintain the physical and emotional standards required for the most demanding missions. Sarah faced this skepticism with quiet professionalism, letting her performance speak for itself. She never sought publicity or recognition, focusing instead on completing her missions and mentoring the next generation of operators. The promotion to Admiral had come as a surprise to many, including Sarah herself. The Navy had been looking for a flag officer who could bridge the gap between traditional military culture and the evolving nature of modern warfare. Sarah's unique background and proven track record made her an obvious choice, though she knew that some would view her appointment as politically motivated rather than merit-based. Now, standing on this unfamiliar base for what was supposed to be a routine inspection, Sarah felt the familiar sensation of being underestimated. She had grown accustomed to people making assumptions about her based on her appearance, and she had learned to use those assumptions to her advantage. Today would be no different. though she had no idea that her visit would soon take a dramatic and dangerous turn. The base itself was a sprawling complex that housed multiple units and served as a training facility for various special operations forces. Security was typically tight, with multiple checkpoints and armed guards monitoring all entrances and exits. However, like many military installations, there was an inherent trust among personnel that sometimes led to complacency. The assumption was that anyone who had made it past the outer perimeter belonged there. As Sarah walked toward the main administrative building, she noticed several things that concerned her from a security perspective. Guards were present but seemed distracted, and some of the access control procedures appeared to be implemented inconsistently. She made mental notes while maintaining her cover as a routine visitor. These observations would later prove to be critically important. The meeting she was scheduled to attend involved reviewing the base's readiness for an upcoming joint training exercise. Representatives from multiple agencies would be participating, and the coordination required was complex. Sarah's role was to assess whether the base had the necessary security protocols in place to handle the influx of personnel and sensitive equipment. Colonel Thompson escorted her through the facility, explaining the various training areas and pointing out recent improvements to the infrastructure. Sarah listened politely while conducting her own assessment of the base's vulnerabilities. Her trained eye caught details that others might miss, from blind spots in camera coverage to patterns in guard rotations. She had spent years learning to notice things that didn't belong or seemed out of place. As they toured the communications center, Sarah observed the personnel at work and noted their procedures for handling classified information. The operators were skilled and professional, but she noticed some minor deviations from standard protocols that could potentially be exploited by someone with malicious intent. She would include these observations in her final report, though she hoped they would remain academic concerns. The base's armory was particularly impressive, housing everything from standard infantry weapons to specialized equipment used by elite units. Sarah's escort explained the security measures in place to prevent unauthorized access, and she was pleased to see that most of the procedures exceeded minimum requirements. However, she also noted that the human element remained the weakest link in any security system. During lunch in the officers' mess, Sarah engaged in casual conversation with base personnel, gathering additional insights into the facility's operations. She was careful not to ask too many pointed questions, instead allowing natural conversation to reveal information about procedures and potential concerns. Her years of intelligence work had taught her that people often revealed more when they didn't realize they were being questioned. The afternoon portion of her visit was scheduled to include a demonstration of the base's emergency response capabilities. This would involve simulated scenarios designed to test how quickly and effectively personnel could respond to various types of threats. Sarah looked forward to observing these exercises, as they would provide valuable insights into the base's overall security posture. As the day progressed, Sarah began to feel that familiar tingling sensation that every experienced operator learned to recognize. It was the subtle awareness that something wasn't quite right, though she couldn't yet identify the specific threat. Her instincts had been honed by years of dangerous missions, and she had learned never to ignore them. She remained alert while maintaining her cover, preparing for the possibility that this routine visit might become something much more significant. The emergency alert system pierced through the afternoon quiet with a series of sharp, urgent tones that immediately commanded attention throughout the entire base. Sarah looked up from the security briefing she had been reviewing, her body automatically tensing as years of combat training kicked in. The sound was unmistakable. This was not a drill. Colonel Thompson's radio crackled to life with reports that sent a chill down everyone's spine. Unknown individuals had breached the perimeter and were moving toward critical infrastructure. What had started as a routine security assessment was rapidly evolving into a real-time crisis that would test everything Sarah had learned during her distinguished military career. The base's emergency response protocols activated immediately, with personnel scrambling to secure sensitive areas and account for all authorized individuals on the premises. However, the attackers had clearly planned their assault carefully, timing it to coincide with a shift change when security might be momentarily relaxed. Sarah's mind raced as she processed the incoming reports. The attackers appeared to be a professional team, well-equipped and familiar with military procedures. They had somehow obtained valid identification badges and uniforms that allowed them to move through the outer checkpoints without raising immediate suspicion. This suggested either inside knowledge or sophisticated intelligence gathering that had preceded their assault. The base commander quickly established a command center in the secure communications facility, bringing together department heads and security personnel to coordinate the response. Sarah found herself in an unusual position. Officially, she was just a visiting inspector with no operational authority, yet her extensive combat experience made her invaluable in analyzing the developing situation. She chose to remain in the background initially, observing and gathering information while the local leadership took charge. Reports continued to stream in from various sections of the base, painting a picture of a coordinated attack targeting multiple objectives simultaneously. The intruders had split into several small teams, each apparently heading toward different critical installations. One group was moving toward the communications center, another toward the armory, and a third seemed focused on the administrative building where sensitive files were stored. The most concerning report came from the base's nuclear materials storage facility, where sensors had detected unauthorized movement near the outer perimeter. This particular building housed small amounts of radioactive materials used for training purposes, but in the wrong hands, even these limited quantities could be fashioned into a devastating dirty bomb. The implications of a successful breach at this location were too terrifying to contemplate. Sarah's instincts told her that this was not a random terrorist attack, but rather a carefully planned operation with specific objectives. The timing, coordination, and apparent inside knowledge suggested that someone had been planning this assault for months, possibly years. She began to suspect that the attackers might be after something more valuable than weapons or radioactive materials. They might be seeking classified information that could compromise national security. As the base's quick reaction force deployed to intercept the intruders, Sarah noticed something that troubled her deeply. Several of the base personnel seemed unusually nervous, and their behavior suggested they might know more about the attack than they were letting on. She had learned during her intelligence career to watch for subtle signs of deception, and her radar was now pinging with warnings. The attackers had demonstrated remarkable knowledge of the base's layout and security procedures, moving through the facility with confidence that suggested extensive preparation. They avoided cameras when possible, and seemed to know exactly which routes would take them to their objectives with minimal exposure to security forces. This level of operational awareness was extremely difficult to achieve without inside assistance. Colonel Thompson was coordinating the response professionally, but Sarah could see the strain on his face as reports continued to arrive. The base's security forces were well trained, but they had been caught off guard by an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. Standard containment procedures were failing because the attackers always seemed to be one step ahead of the defensive response. Sarah made a decision that would later prove crucial to the outcome of the crisis. Despite her unofficial status, she approached the command center and offered her assistance based on her specialized training and experience. The colonel was initially hesitant to involve a visiting inspector in active operations, but the deteriorating situation left him little choice but to accept any help he could get. Her first recommendation was to implement lockdown procedures that went beyond the standard protocols, essentially treating the base as if it were under siege. This meant sealing all entrances and exits, establishing multiple security checkpoints throughout the facility, and requiring all personnel to undergo verification procedures before being allowed to move between areas. These measures would slow down the attackers, but would also help identify any inside collaborators. The nuclear materials facility had become the primary concern, and Sarah volunteered to lead a team to secure that location. Brother May gave him his golden courage within the under-circumstances of bailout history. And they turned Capiac out base, and they take over him, and the book it's about history. Her special operations background made her uniquely qualified for this type of mission, and she knew that time was running out, till Brother May started riding out. As Sarah prepared for what would effectively be a combat mission on American soil, she reflected on the irony of her situation. She had spent years fighting enemies in foreign countries, always knowing that her ultimate mission was to protect the homeland from exactly this type of threat. Now she found herself preparing to engage hostile forces on a military base that should have been among the most secure locations in the country. The team she assembled included the base's most experienced security personnel, along with several special operations soldiers who happened to be on the base for training purposes. It was a formidable group, but they were facing an enemy that had demonstrated sophisticated planning and execution. Sarah knew that they would need every advantage they could get to prevent a catastrophic outcome. Intelligence reports suggested that the attackers were armed with military-grade weapons and had access to advanced surveillance equipment. They appeared to be monitoring base communications and might be intercepting radio traffic, which meant that traditional coordination methods could be compromised. Sarah implemented communication protocols from her special operations background that would be harder for the enemy to decrypt or jam. The approach to the nuclear facility would require careful planning, as the attackers had demonstrated their willingness to engage in firefights with base security forces. Sarah's team would need to balance speed with caution, moving quickly enough to prevent the attackers from achieving their objectives while avoiding unnecessary casualties among friendly forces. As they prepared to move out, Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that had sustained her through countless dangerous missions. The stakes were higher than anything she had faced before, as failure could result in radioactive contamination that would affect thousands of people in the surrounding area. She checked her equipment one final time and gave her team members a brief but thorough briefing on their mission parameters. The base had become a battlefield, and Sarah was about to enter the most important fight of her career. Everything she had learned during her years as a Navy SEAL would be put to the test in the next few hours. The enemy was skilled and determined, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated the resolve and capabilities of the defenders who stood between them and their objectives. Moving through the base toward the nuclear facility, Sarah's team encountered evidence of the attackers' professionalism at every turn. They had disabled security cameras systematically, neutralized motion sensors, and even planted false signals to confuse the base's automated monitoring systems. This level of technical sophistication suggested that they had access to detailed intelligence about the facility's defensive measures. The nuclear storage facility loomed ahead through the darkness, its imposing concrete structure illuminated by emergency floodlights that cast eerie shadows across the surrounding landscape. Sarah's team moved with practiced precision, using hand signals and night vision equipment to coordinate their approach. The silence was broken only by the distant sound of gunfire from other parts of the base, where security forces were engaging the remaining attacker teams. As they drew closer to their objective, Sarah's tactical experience became invaluable in reading the subtle signs that revealed the enemy's presence. Disturbed gravel, fresh scuff marks on walls, and the faint outline of boot prints in the soft earth told a story of recent activity. The attackers had indeed reached this location, and based on the evidence, they were already inside the perimeter of the storage facility. Sarah signaled for her team to halt while she assessed the situation more carefully. Through her night vision scope, she could see that the outer security door had been compromised, but not in the crude manner typical of desperate terrorists. Instead, the lock had been bypassed using sophisticated electronic equipment, suggesting that the attackers possessed both the tools and knowledge necessary to defeat military-grade security systems. The facility's layout worked both for and against the defending team. The narrow corridors and multiple security checkpoints would slow down any attackers trying to reach the actual storage areas, but they would also limit the defenders' ability to maneuver and could create dangerous choke points where the enemy might establish defensive positions. Sarah's special operations training had prepared her for exactly these types of confined space engagements. Moving into the facility required careful coordination to avoid friendly fire incidents while ensuring that no corners or potential hiding spots were left unchecked. Sarah's team spread out in a formation that maximized their coverage while maintaining mutual support. Each member carried specialized equipment for detecting radioactive materials, as they needed to know immediately if the attackers had succeeded in accessing any of the stored substances. The first floor of the facility appeared to be clear, but Sarah's instincts warned her that this was likely a tactical deception. Professional attackers would not leave their rear area unsecured, and the ease with which her team was advancing suggested that they were being channeled toward a specific location. She modified her approach accordingly, using alternative routes that would be less predictable to an enemy monitoring their progress. Her suspicions proved correct when her point man detected electronic surveillance equipment that had been hastily installed in the main corridor. The attackers were indeed tracking the movements of the security forces, giving them a significant tactical advantage in any confrontation. Sarah's team carefully disabled these devices while avoiding the obvious routes that were likely being monitored. The nuclear materials themselves were stored in a highly secure vault on the facility's third floor, protected by multiple layers of physical and electronic security measures. However, Sarah knew that determined attackers with sufficient preparation could potentially overcome even these obstacles. given enough time. The key was to intercept them before they could complete whatever process they were using to breach the final barriers. As the team ascended to the second floor, they encountered the first direct evidence of the attackers' presence: a security guard who had been subdued but not seriously injured. The man was conscious and able to provide valuable intelligence about the number and equipment of the enemy force. According to his account, there were at least 4 attackers, all dressed in military-style gear and carrying weapons that suggested special operations training. The guard's description of the attackers' behavior and tactics confirmed Sarah's assessment that they were dealing with professionals, not ideological extremists. They had moved with purpose and discipline, using minimal force to neutralize opposition while focusing on their primary objective. This suggested that they had specific goals and were operating under time constraints that prevented them from engaging in prolonged combat. Sarah's team continued their advance, now knowing they were pursuing a skilled enemy force that had already penetrated deep into the facility. The attackers had approximately a 15-minute head start, which could be critical depending on how long it took them to breach the final security barriers protecting the nuclear materials. Every second counted in preventing a potential catastrophe. The facility's design included multiple redundant security systems, each requiring different types of expertise to overcome. The attackers would need specialists in electronics, physical security, and possibly nuclear materials handling to complete their mission successfully. The fact that they had made it this far suggested they possessed all of these capabilities, making them an extremely formidable adversary. As the team reached the third floor, they could hear the sound of sophisticated equipment being operated somewhere ahead of them. The attackers were clearly working on breaching the vault, and based on the sounds, they were making significant progress. Sarah realized that a direct assault would be necessary to prevent them from achieving their objective, despite the tactical disadvantages of attacking an entrenched enemy position. The vault area was designed as a natural choke point, with only one primary access route and limited room for maneuvering. This made it an ideal defensive position for anyone who reached it first, but it also meant that the attackers would have difficulty escaping once they were discovered. Sarah began formulating a plan that would exploit this limitation while minimizing risk to her team and the facility itself. Her team's equipment included specialized non-lethal weapons designed for use in sensitive environments where conventional gunfire might pose additional risks. The nuclear storage facility definitely qualified as such an environment, as stray bullets could potentially damage containment systems or radioactive materials. Sarah made the tactical decision to prioritize these weapons unless the situation became absolutely desperate. The sounds of the attackers' work grew louder as Sarah's team positioned themselves for their assault. Through careful observation, they were able to determine that the enemy had indeed brought sophisticated equipment capable of defeating the vault's security systems. However, the process was taking longer than the attackers had apparently anticipated, suggesting that the facility's designers had done their job well. Sarah used this delay to her advantage, positioning her team members to cover all possible escape routes, while preparing for a coordinated assault on the vault area. The attackers would be focused on their technical work and might not be maintaining adequate security, giving the defenders a brief window of opportunity to strike before they could reorganize their defenses. The plan called for simultaneous movement from multiple directions, using flashbang grenades to disorient the attackers while avoiding damage to the sensitive equipment and materials in the vault area. Sarah's team members were all experienced in close-quarters combat, but this would be their first test under these particular circumstances. The stakes could not have been higher. As they prepared to execute their assault, Sarah reflected on the chain of events that had brought her to this moment. A routine inspection had become a life-or-death struggle against an enemy that threatened not just the base, but potentially thousands of innocent civilians. Her years of training and experience had prepared her for this type of mission, but she had never imagined it would take place on American soil. The final security barrier protecting the nuclear materials was beginning to show signs of being compromised, based on the changing sounds coming from the vault area. Sarah gave the signal for her team to begin their assault, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether they could prevent a catastrophic breach of national security. Moving through the facility's corridors toward their target, each team member understood that they were engaged in one of the most critical missions any of them had ever undertaken. The enemy they faced was skilled and determined, but they had made the mistake of threatening something that Sarah and her team were sworn to protect. The outcome would depend on training, courage, and a little bit of luck. The vault area erupted in chaos as Sarah's team launched their coordinated assault, but what they encountered was far more complex than anyone had anticipated. The attackers were not just skilled professionals. They included several individuals wearing authentic military uniforms and carrying identification that suggested they were authorized personnel. This revelation sent shockwaves through Sarah's team as they realized they might be facing a sophisticated inside job involving trusted members of the base's own security apparatus. The lead attacker, a tall man with the bearing and equipment of special operations personnel, turned toward Sarah's team with a confidence that was deeply unsettling. Instead of surrendering or attempting to flee, he calmly announced that they were conducting an authorized security exercise and that Sarah's team was interfering with a classified operation. The claim was delivered with such authority that it momentarily caused confusion among some of the defending team members. Sarah's extensive experience with deception operations immediately triggered her suspicions about this explanation. The timing, methodology, and breach of multiple security protocols were inconsistent with any authorized exercise she had ever encountered. Moreover, the base commander had made no mention of such an operation during their earlier briefings, and the emergency response throughout the facility suggested that this was definitely not a planned event. However, the presence of apparently legitimate military personnel among the attackers complicated the tactical situation enormously. Sarah could not simply order her team to engage targets that might include fellow service members who were following orders, even if those orders seemed questionable. She needed more information before making a decision that could have devastating consequences for everyone involved. The vault itself had been partially breached, with sophisticated electronic equipment attached to the security systems, in a manner that suggested intimate knowledge of their operation. The attackers had managed to disable several layers of protection and were clearly close to accessing the nuclear material storage area. Whether this was part of an authorized test or a genuine threat, the potential for catastrophic outcomes remained very real. Sarah made the decision to engage the lead attacker directly, demanding immediate verification of his claims through proper command channels. Her years of intelligence work had taught her to recognize the subtle signs of deception, and something about the man's demeanor suggested that his story was fabricated. Professional military personnel conducting authorized exercises would have proper documentation and coordination with base security. The confrontation escalated when the supposed exercise leader refused to provide verification and instead insisted that Sarah's team withdraw immediately. He claimed that their interference was compromising a critical national security operation and that they would be held responsible for any consequences. The intimidation tactics were sophisticated and might have worked against less experienced personnel, but Sarah had faced down much more dangerous adversaries in her career. As the standoff continued, Sarah noticed several disturbing details about the attackers' equipment and behavior. While their uniforms and basic gear appeared authentic, some of their specialized tools were not standard military issue and seemed more consistent with criminal or terrorist applications. Additionally, their body language and tactical positioning suggested they were prepared for combat rather than dealing with a misunderstanding among fellow service members. The breakthrough came when one of Sarah's team members successfully contacted the base command center and confirmed that no authorized security exercises were scheduled for the nuclear storage facility. This information eliminated any remaining doubt about the attackers' true intentions and freed Sarah to take decisive action to protect the facility and its contents. However, the tactical situation remained extremely challenging. The attackers were positioned defensively within the vault area, with excellent cover and multiple potential escape routes. They were also holding positions that would allow them to potentially damage or contaminate the nuclear materials if they felt cornered. Sarah needed a solution that would neutralize the threat while preventing any catastrophic outcomes. The lead attacker's demeanor changed dramatically when he realized that his deception had been exposed. The calm, authoritative persona disappeared, replaced by the focused intensity of a professional operative whose mission had been compromised. He began issuing orders to his team in a language that Sarah recognized but could not immediately identify, suggesting that they might be dealing with foreign agents rather than domestic terrorists. Sarah's assessment of the situation indicated that the attackers had invested too much in reaching this point to simply surrender when confronted. They would likely attempt to complete their mission or at least cause maximum damage if they could not escape successfully. This meant that her team needed to be prepared for a desperate and potentially devastating final confrontation. The nuclear material storage area contained various radioactive substances used for training and research purposes. While not weapons-grade material, these substances could still be fashioned into dirty bombs or other radiological weapons capable of causing massive casualties and long-term contamination. The attackers' apparent expertise suggested they understood these possibilities and might be prepared to exploit them. Sarah's tactical options were limited by the need to prevent any damage to the storage containers or dispersal of radioactive materials. Conventional weapons fire in such a confined space posed unacceptable risks, even if it would be the most effective way to neutralize the threat. She would need to rely on precision tactics and non-lethal weapons to resolve the situation safely. The attackers seemed to understand their tactical disadvantages and began attempting to negotiate from their barricaded position within the vault area. They offered to withdraw peacefully if guaranteed safe passage off the base, claiming that their mission objectives could be achieved through other means. Sarah recognized this as a standard delaying tactic designed to buy time for reinforcements or alternative plans. Communication with the base command center revealed that similar negotiations were taking place at other locations where attacker teams had been cornered. This suggested a coordinated fallback plan that the enemy had prepared in case their primary mission failed. Sarah suspected that the attackers were actually trying to gather intelligence about the base's security procedures and response capabilities rather than just steal nuclear materials. The standoff reached a critical point when motion sensors detected additional movement in the facility's lower levels. The attackers might have backup personnel moving into position, or alternatively, additional security forces might be approaching to assist Sarah's team. Without clear identification of these new contacts, the tactical situation became even more complex and dangerous. Sarah made the difficult decision to initiate action against the attackers before the situation could deteriorate further. Her team was positioned advantageously, and they had confirmed intelligence about the enemy's intentions and capabilities. Waiting longer would only allow the attackers more time to implement whatever contingency plans they had prepared for this scenario. The final assault would require split-second timing and absolute precision to prevent any catastrophic outcomes. Sarah's team members understood the stakes and were prepared to risk their lives to prevent the nuclear materials from falling into the wrong hands. Everything they had trained for throughout their military careers had prepared them for exactly this type of critical moment. As Sarah gave the signal to begin the final phase of their operation, she reflected on the extraordinary circumstances that had brought her to this point. A routine inspection had evolved into a life-or-death struggle against sophisticated adversaries who threatened national security at its most fundamental level. The outcome would depend on skill, courage, and the determination to succeed regardless of the personal cost. The final confrontation unfolded with lightning speed as Sarah drew her service weapon and commanded the attackers to surrender, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to life-and-death decisions. The lead attacker's eyes widened as he suddenly realized that the unassuming woman he had dismissed as a civilian inspector was actually a highly trained military operator pointing a pistol directly at his center mass. His tactical calculations had been fatally flawed from the moment he had underestimated her based on her appearance. Sarah's years of special operations training had taught her to project calm authority even in the most chaotic situations, and her steady voice cut through the tension like a blade. She identified herself clearly as Admiral Sarah Chen, United States Navy, and ordered the attackers to step away from the nuclear storage containers with their hands visible. The transformation in her demeanor was so complete that even her own team members were momentarily surprised by the commanding presence she suddenly projected. The psychological impact on the attackers was immediate and profound. They had planned their operation around the assumption that they would be facing conventional base security forces, not a decorated Navy SEAL admiral with combat experience spanning multiple theaters of operation. Their leader tried to maintain his composure, but Sarah could see the doubt creeping into his eyes as he reassessed his tactical situation. However, the standoff was far from over. The attackers still held advantageous positions within the vault area, and their leader made one final attempt to regain control of the situation. He pointed out that Sarah and her team were outnumbered, and that any gunfight in such close proximity to radioactive materials would risk exactly the kind of contamination they were trying to prevent. His logic was sound, but he had made a critical error in judgment about Sarah's willingness to take calculated risks. Sarah's response demonstrated why she had earned her reputation as one of the military's most effective special operations officers. Instead of engaging in further negotiations or allowing the situation to escalate, she made a split-second tactical decision that would later be studied in military academies as an example of decisive leadership under extreme pressure. She signaled her team to execute a coordinated non-lethal takedown that would neutralize the threat while minimizing risk to the facility. The action was over in less than 30 seconds, with each team member executing their assigned role with precision that reflected years of intensive training. Flashbang grenades disoriented the attackers just long enough for Sarah's team to close distance and engage them with conducted electrical weapons and other non-lethal force options. The attackers' sophisticated planning had not anticipated this particular tactical approach, and their resistance collapsed almost immediately. Sarah personally subdued the team leader, using combat techniques that left no doubt about her special operations background. The man who had attempted to intimidate her with false authority found himself face down on the vault floor, with zip-tie restraints securing his hands behind his back. His carefully constructed facade of legitimacy had crumbled in the face of genuine military professionalism and expertise. The immediate aftermath revealed the true scope of the threat that had been neutralized. A thorough search of the attackers revealed sophisticated intelligence-gathering equipment, detailed facility blueprints, and communication devices that suggested coordination with external handlers. This had been a professional espionage operation designed to gather information about American nuclear security procedures rather than a simple theft attempt. Analysis of the attackers' equipment and methods revealed that they had been conducting surveillance of the facility for months, gathering intelligence about guard rotations, security protocols, and facility layouts. Their operation had been designed to test American responses to this type of threat, while gathering valuable information for future, potentially more serious attacks. Sarah's intervention had prevented not just an immediate security breach, but potentially much larger future threats. The foreign intelligence connections became clear when initial interrogations revealed that the attackers had been recruited and trained by a hostile nation seeking to understand American nuclear security capabilities. Their mission had been to probe for weaknesses and gather intelligence that could be exploited in future operations. The sophisticated nature of their planning and equipment suggested state-level sponsorship. Sarah's role in preventing this intelligence disaster earned her widespread recognition within the special operations and intelligence communities, though the details remained classified for national security reasons. Her ability to see through the attackers' deceptions and respond effectively under pressure had potentially prevented the compromise of critical security information that could have endangered numerous facilities and personnel. The base-wide security alert was finally lifted 6 hours after it had begun, with all attacker teams neutralized and extensive searches confirming that no additional threats remained. The coordination between different enemy teams had been impressive, but their overall operation had failed due to their fundamental underestimation of the base's defensive capabilities and the presence of personnel like Sarah who could respond effectively to sophisticated threats. Colonel Thompson later admitted that the base's standard security procedures would likely have been insufficient to prevent the attackers from achieving at least some of their objectives. Sarah's presence and immediate recognition of the true nature of the threat had been crucial in coordinating an effective response before the situation could spiral out of control. The investigation that followed revealed extensive penetration of base personnel records and security protocols by foreign intelligence services. Several base employees were found to have been compromised through various means, providing the attackers with inside information that had enabled their sophisticated assault. The security overhaul that resulted would fundamentally change how sensitive military facilities protected themselves against future threats. Sarah's unassuming appearance had proven to be both her greatest tactical advantage and the attackers' fatal mistake. Their assumption that a civilian-dressed woman posed no significant threat had blinded them to the reality that they were facing one of America's most capable special operations officers. This psychological blindness had prevented them from taking appropriate precautions when their operation was discovered. The broader implications of the attack led to nationwide reviews of security procedures at facilities housing sensitive materials or information. Sarah's after-action report became required reading for security personnel at similar facilities. and her tactical responses were incorporated into training programs designed to prepare defenders for sophisticated state-sponsored threats. Years later, when details of the operation were partially declassified, Sarah's actions on that day were recognized as having prevented what could have been one of the most serious intelligence compromises in American history. Her ability to maintain her cover while conducting a security assessment, recognize a sophisticated threat when it emerged, and respond effectively with the resources available had saved not just one military base, but potentially the entire national nuclear security infrastructure. The attackers had shouted for everyone to search her, assuming she was just another civilian who could be intimidated and controlled. Instead, they had encountered a warrior whose quiet professionalism masked capabilities they never imagined. When Admiral Sarah Chen drew her weapon and took command of the situation, she demonstrated that the most dangerous opponents are often those who appear least threatening until the moment they choose to act.